Hi, welcome. Can everyone hear me okay? Hi, everyone. Welcome. Can you all hear me okay? Oh, there we go. There we go. Now it's working. Thank you. We're just about to get started. If you haven't done so already, please find a seat that feels comfortable for you, and we'll get this discussion going. Good to go? Okay. Wonderful. Well, welcome. My name is Noura. I'm a Palestinian organizer with. Oh, okay. With sorry, I'm nervous, so I'll be reading. With Salan Kawakib, we're from Chicago. Myself, I grew up in occupied Haysapa, where some of our panelists are joining us from. Very honored to be here to facilitate our discussion on domestic warfare and decolonization with some hometown heroes and some rad organizers from StopCopCity in Atlanta who will be introducing themselves here shortly. To frame this conversation, I'll start with questions the panelists were given in advance. Then we'll pass the mic to them to share their thoughts before opening the floor to the audience. We'll be reserving the last few minutes to share this space with Joel, who is the father of Tortuguita, who was martyred earlier this year fighting to stop Cop City in Atlanta. Welcome to the space. With the threat of cop cities across Turtle Island, where militarized police forces are working to develop tactical training compounds to practice urban combat, we've asked panelists to speak to the risks our communities face with suppression tactics that our comrades in Atlanta's forests have been up against. Stop Cop City is the latest in a long history of militant domestic resistance against the U.S. settler colonial project. We've invited our comrades from the NDN Collective to share with us how the legacy of indigenous resistance to the American colonization informed the tactics used in the Standing Rock and No DAPL campaigns as well. This will launch a broader conversation on the relationship between struggles to resist policing, U.S. imperialism, and defending the land. The goal is to learn from each other's strategies and tactics so that we can use them in our various fights against colonial imperialism. Finally, we've asked our panel to share with us how their movements have embodied the Palestinian concept of the popular cradle. The popular cradle is the resistance-enabling environment of having massive support from ordinary people who are willing to financially, socially, and politically sustain the resistance. In the early 1900s, for example, the kafia became universal to make it difficult to distinguish between resistance fighters and civilians. We've asked our panelists how their movements have built popular mobilization and how they interact and sustain the popular cradle. With that, I'll turn it over to our panelists for the discussion to begin. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I don't really have an introduction. My name is Mango. I love Atlanta. I love Palestine, and I hate the cops. I want to start with gratitude for inviting me here and welcoming me into your city. In a time when the three-way struggle feels more like a baton pass from neoliberalism to fascism, land acknowledgements feel empty and lacking of context and care. So instead, I want to honor and name that the city I love was literally built upon the stolen loving and labor of the Muskogee peoples. That the many corridors I ride my bike down were trading and communication routes that got subsumed by the colonizer. That here in Chicago, Illinois, something similar and equally as awful happened to the Ojibwe, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi peoples. As we all know, the nation state that stole my ancestors has not yet filled itself on our blood and attempts to facilitate the annihilation of indigenous peoples of Congo, Palestine, Sudan, and across the world. Today, as an indigenous descended person, I seek to do more than acknowledge the crime committed against us, but to stand in solidarity with your struggle and mine against the greedy colonizer. It has been my deepest honor to participate in the struggle to stop Cop City. It's with deep intimacy with its actors and my beloved city that I offer these reflections. I'm humbled to be among a panel of brilliant people doing brilliant work, and I want to talk about the stickiness of building popular culture in the struggle against imperialism. Today, as my friends and neighbors and communities, everyone from our smallest children to our elders, stand on the front line of a bloody struggle, I realize how tactical it is that they lie to us about how struggle is waged. I realize how tactical it is that they shrink the timeline and pick out heroes to make protraction feel ambiguous and impossible. The struggle against Cop City in Atlanta is just one front line in a larger, incredibly urgent war against imperial fascist takeover around the world. Anywhere that we are resisting the colonizer, anywhere that we are resisting the imperial urge is a front line in this war. Because of Atlanta's connection to the occupying entity, importance to the internal colony, and legacy within the ongoing genocide against First Nations people, this struggle has much to teach us about how we build popular movement and cultural resistance. The Stop Cop City movement owes so much of its fire to what preceded it. No DAPL, resistance to the so-called war on terror, Black Lives Matter, Stop Line 3, the struggle to liberate veterans of the Black Liberation Army and our Native siblings like Leonard Peltier. And still, so much to learn from the ways that those struggles built popular culture amongst the people who are in most immediate danger. The culture of our movement in Atlanta, though beautiful, powerful, and unwilling to cede power to the state that attempts to kill us, does not reflect the culture of my city. At times, it feels as if this movement has failed to humble itself and seek the mandate of the people, though there have been many urges and attempts by people I deeply respect. Despite our bike rides, food distros, rallies, and vigils, when I go into my city, it's very clear to me that we failed to meaningfully connect with and engage the Lyft and Uber drivers, public school teachers, public transit riders, parents, and community members that truly make up the heart of Atlanta. These are the people whose livelihoods are stolen to kill Palestinians and Haitians. These are the people who risk the most should the empire succeed. But where are they in our struggle? Where is their militancy and their resistance? The material reality is that Atlanta is already a cop city, and it already has an armed insurgency. Any meaningful engagement with an Atlanta subaltern, are homeless, are incarcerated, are mentally ill, etc., points to that fact quite quickly. A city physically built on segregation and exclusion. As of 2024, Atlanta is the 7th most surveilled city in the world. We are home to 2 of the deadliest jails in the South. We consistently rank last in measures for upward social mobility. Our healthcare infrastructure is quickly crumbling. By all measures and indicators, Atlanta is already Cop City. However, the very nature of our movement and its very rhetoric and language, Stop Cop City, ignores the material conditions that exist for Black, Arab, and Native people every day in Atlanta. But what more could we expect from a movement largely comprised of well-meaning gentrifiers? Cop City did not invent Atlanta's insurgency. Rather, it popularized a very specific type of militarism to a very specific class of people. Atlanta's poor Black insurgency has deep roots to African resistance against the formation of this nation state. Today, Atlanta's Black insurgency is systematically and viciously hunted down by the Atlanta DeKalb police officers, tried in kangaroo courts, and thrown away in the bowels of a horrid caging system. When I log on to my comrades' bond hearings, it is often the image of dozens of shackled young Black people that greet me. Nothing short of militant popular uprising will stop a state so insistent on our blood. But militant uprising against it must include the people most impacted by the violence of the state. They must be our deep collaborators in this movement. It is Atlanta's working Black poor who are most engaged by the officers who are trained by Israel. It is Atlanta's Palestinian and Arab populations who, alongside Black radicals and militants, the intense surveillance network is deployed against. It is the Muskogee people who feel the compounded and ever hateful impacts of the crimes done against Weilani, the South River tributary, and our wildlife. Yet we have built a movement that has failed to meaningfully engage those very people, and to clarify, not in the neoliberal trust Black women sense, but like as comrades and trusted collaborators. We urgently need to popularize the hateful nature of being a front line against imperial expansion and deepening. And our failure to properly connect the struggles between resisting policing and U.S. imperialism, we have lost the potential for a base of comrades and collaborators, even as the system chews them up first. It is never too late to popularize this struggle. It is never too late to fight back against the colonizer. Should we make it clear to the working people of Atlanta, the subaltern, and across the United States that the very nature of their repression is a result of our state sacrificing them to the war machine, we could elevate the nature of our war and our struggle. We could elevate the nature of our resistance. Indeed, in 2020, it was the collaboration between Black insurgents in the streets, Arab youth, and Native pipeline and railway resistors that kept the energy going and showed the world what was possible. If, as the principle of the popular cradle suggests, we seek to elevate the level of resistance, the level of struggle, to build a popular culture that seeks out consistent confrontation with the state, then the struggle has to deepen its relationship with the people, has to prioritize their struggles, their qualms, and their wins. Thank you.
Hamadakyapi, Nick Tilson Amachiapi, Chant Eawashtin Apet Chuzapalo. My name is Nick Tilson. I'm Oglala Lakota. I greet you in my Lakota language. I'm from the Oshetishakoi, born and raised on my homelands, work on my homelands, and I'm the founder of Indian Collective. My mother and father met at the occupation in Wounded Knee in 1973, and I was raised up in the American Indian movement my whole life since I was a child. And I grew up in a community on Pine Ridge in which the federal government chose as a place to attack and to destroy the American Indian movement. I lived in a community in which they decided to arm people, and the federal government decided to arm people in that community to kill one another. And I grew up in the aftermath of that movement. And I've seen how the movement ripped through our communities and destroyed our people, and I've seen what is possible. And and I've been an organizer my whole life. And so I urge us to think about the moments that we're in right now, because what the federal government will do to go after us that are speaking truth to power, they'll try to destroy our entire families. They'll try to jail all of our people. They'll go after our children. They'll go after our families. They'll go after our freedom. Since we started Indian Collective, organization's only 6 years old. And of those 6 years, we've been in litigation for 4 of them. And we're in litigation today. But the difference is we knew they were going to come after us. We knew that they were going to come after us, so we took the lessons learned from before, how we organized our money, organized our resources, organized our people, made it sure that we had duty of care, community care, that we had mechanisms created to protect our people. And I think that we have to think several steps ahead of them. And whether, all the different ways that you organize people and organize resources, you have to get creative about how you do that. We step into this work, on an arc of 500 years of indigenous resistance. We're not talking about militarism that just started in the 21st century. The first time that they built a military and deputized civilians in this country was when they deputized civilians to kill Indian people for the purpose of stealing our land. So when we talk about land back, a lot of times people think we're just talking about land. What we're talking about is the settler colonial system that built this country. We're talking about not only getting our land back, but then dismantling the systems that made it possible for the stealing of our land in the first place. Dismantling the systems that exists today for the purpose of maintaining the theft of our land. In the communities that I come from, in western South Dakota, Native American children have the lowest economic and education mobility than any child in America. We have the lowest life expectancies than anywhere in America. We're amongst some of the people that are struggling in this country, but it's also one of the last places that our people in this country resisted. And we have been severely punished for that. But out of that resistance comes a courage. It's not a surprise that the No DAPO movement happened in Oceti-Sakowin lands. It's no surprise that after the Lakota defeated the 7th Cavalry at the Battle of the Little Bighorn, that we captured the American flag, and we never returned it. And that flag is in Standing Rock. So when you think about these things, when you think about the military state, I continue to ask you to think about in a historical context, that it's on a continuum of resistance. And the current state of things that we're in right now is becoming more and more dangerous for our people. But it's not a reason to not resist. It's actually more of the reason to resist. It's why in these moments that we have to find ways to build collective power. And when we built Indian Collective, one of the things that we realized is that we needed to build movement infrastructure by and for Indigenous people. Because even in broader movements, Indigenous people were being erased. Indigenous people weren't having access to our own resources to organize our own people. So we had to rely on others to do that. And so an Indian Collective is using and built this as movement infrastructure by and for Indigenous people because it's about reclaiming our power, even as we organize. And it puts us in better positionality to build cross-intersectional movements with other folks. We live and we focus on Indigenous people, but it allows us to create an avenue for deep solidarity with others because of that. And it allows us to build movements that help dismantle white supremacy and helps us focus on creating structural change in our community. And so Indian Collective, we're not just resistors, we're developers. We develop our communities. We're rebuilding our food systems. We're saving our Indigenous languages. When we say defend, develop, decolonize, we're talking about defending air, land, water, rights, and community and people. We're talking about developing regenerative and inclusive economies based on our values. We're talking about decolonizing through the revitalization of our Indigenous languages, ceremonies, and lifeways. And right now, in this moment in history, that is a threat to everything that this settler colonial state is about, because it holds up a mirror to how this settler colonial state is a farce and has set out exactly what it intended to do, was to colonize our people. So I sit here before you as a father of four, as an organizer. I don't remember a time in my family in which we weren't fighting the government. I don't remember that time. And I'm sitting up here facing 25 years before you right now, having to get permission from the 7th Circuit of South Dakota even to come here to protest. So the risks that we take while we're organizing in a settler colonial state, look at the things that we're doing here. Some people say, well, I don't know about Indian Collective because they're a nonprofit. And I'm like, blood, we're fucking revolutionaries. We're using these tools that are available to us to get to where we need to be at. So fuck with me because you want to be a part of the revolution that we're building instead of sitting back and critiquing, the tool that we're using at the moment in time. That's it, Tuolo. Thank you.
Ichahatnik, Yat-e, She Janine Yazi and Shia. I'm a Dene woman, also known by our English term Navajo, but I prefer Dene. It's the language of my people. I'm also a mother of 2 children, lifelong community organizer, human rights and indigenous rights advocate. And I'm currently the director of policy and advocacy with Indian Collective. And I so sincerely appreciate being able to work with comrades in a movement-based organization that has such a clear historical and political lens about what we are fighting against. Because everything that Nick laid out becomes so vital for us to be able to develop strategies and tactics and protocols and principles that hold our movement together as we confront what we would call the modern day monsters of our time. And that clear lens, that political analysis, is what can hold us together with a clear lens about what we are actually fighting, so that we can discern the tactics and the strategies that they have always used and employed against our movements. I come from a people who fought off 2 waves of colonization, first from the Spanish and then from the Americans. And we're still in that battle of fighting a new wave of colonization through neoliberalism and the ways that that's being forced and perpetuating the continued threats against our lands, our peoples, our communities, and our ways of living. And from that lens, from remembering that there's never been a time when we haven't been in conflict with this government, it is very clear to see that what we are up against is the evolution of these colonizer tactics. And that's why it's important to name colonization and settler colonialism as the root cause of many of the things that we are battling today. These colonizer tactics have evolved in a lot of ways. In many ways, they follow the same formula of trying to ensure that they weaken us, they weaken our communities, they make us suspicious against each other, they force us into being reactive all the time. They force us to trying to create a purity of politics that makes us police one another instead of actually working together. And in many ways, those patterns and those formulas are the same. And then the tools themselves have evolved. And that's what links most of our struggles right now in this moment about, fighting against StopCopCities and the militarization of police and movements all across the globe, and the use of technology in that. And so we're also having to evolve our strategies and our tactics in the face of all of that. But when we hold ourselves together to that clear lens and we continue to have an appropriate historical lens, and I guess I'm going to harp on that for a little while because, dude, I'm tired of going to spaces where we should be in community with comrades and with allies and no one knows anything about the indigenous movement or resistance in this country. I'm tired of being in spaces where we're talking about building solidarity and no one knows how to support the self-determination of indigenous peoples in those rooms. The invisibilization of indigenous peoples and indigenous issues is a disadvantage to all of our movements. It's a disadvantage to all of our strategies. One of the things that we say when we're building with community and we're holding ourselves to the principled discipline that is necessary to advance our causes on each of our front lines of our homelands is that it's not just about what we're fighting against, but also what we're building together. And if we don't have a shared analysis of what we're also fighting against and what we're creating together, that's when we become weak. That's when these strategies and these tactics that are rooted in fear, rooted in the scarcity mindset, rooted in triggering historical and modern traumas, that's where they become effective at weakening our solidarity or at weakening the ways that we show up for one another. And that's what we must fight against. Knowing who we are fighting, being able to properly name it, and recognizing the tactics and the strategies that they deploy against us, and holding each other as good relatives so that it does not continue to work to weaken our movements. Because we know that when we make the conscious decisions and intentional decisions to use some of these tools and some of these pathways that are laid out for us within this colonial system, that doesn't matter how much we follow the rules. It doesn't matter how good we are at meeting those expectations that are put upon us. They will still find a way to villainize and demonize us and criminalize us and our peoples. And we have to accept that as part of the role and the responsibility we have to hold and step into when we're fighting for our shared liberation. Because it's never going to be easy, it's never going to be perfect, and it's never going to be something that is clearly set out for us, because we're trying to create those pathways on our own together. And so we're here at the DNC because we showed up at the RNC, because we know that it's not about this fucked up two-party system. It's about what we do before and after the elections, how we build collective power, how we continue to create the analysis and the goals for our movements that hold us together to achieve the vision that we hold for our communities. And that it's so important for us to, when we're in these spaces, to let those that can't be here but are watching know they are not alone at home, and they're not isolated in their feelings. They're not the only ones that recognize how fucked up this system is, and that there are people fighting for the solutions, and that we're going to continue to do it, not just in this spaces, but beyond. That we're not falling for these these false binaries and this electoral rhetoric that's making it seem that these parties are two separate entities, when they're in alignment in all of the policies and strategies that are oppressing our communities. And we're letting it known that we're going to continue to organize here and beyond, to build that collective power so that we can achieve the freedom and the equality and the vision of justice that all of our communities deserve. And as Indigenous peoples, we're here to remind people that our struggle and our fight for our self-determination and our sovereignty has always been at its core a fight for humanity, a fight for a way of living that is anti-capitalism, a fight for a way of governing that centers people's well-being, that centers sustainable food systems, that centers a care economy, that is capable of taking care of all of our people, and we will never give up on that dream.
Hello, my name is Santiago, they, he pronouns. I'm a labor organizer and forest defender from Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm a member of Unity and Struggle. In the kind of couple of weeks I've had to process some of the questions laid out earlier, one particular question kind of stood out to me, and that was the popular cradle concept. This popular cradle concept to me reminded me of a lot of the conversations I've had with comrades in Atlanta about the need for a culture of resistance within the StopCopCity movement, and the need for the StopCopCity movement to integrate itself with pre-existing cultures of resistance. Because we already know that there's people resisting every day against capitalism and the state, be it in Atlanta, be it in Chicago, be it in the indigenous lands out west, everywhere. We're all resisting capitalism and the state in our own little ways. But how do we get ourselves embedded in that? And also, how do we get working people to be part of existing campaigns, part of existing spaces? How do we level with them? How do we respect their voices and get them integrated? Lorenzo Camboa Irvin talks a lot about communities becoming ungovernable to the state after sufficient social and material infrastructure is built. I think an example of that is in Waimapu, in so-called Chile. We see the Mapuche people reclaim their land by setting up settlements owned by forestry and big agricultural owners in the land in southern so-called Chile. And there's a reclamation of culture and language that is happening from the Mapuche immigrants that go and move to the big city of Santiago to the homelands of the Mapuche in Waimapu. And we see that all the while there is militant action directly resisting these forestry companies and these agricultural companies and the state itself through direct action. So that brings us to like Elena. Do we see a popular cradle in ATL? And the short answer, at least when it comes to StopCopCity, is no. But the long answer is no, but there is a potential for that. StopCopCity itself has spread itself wide across the city. 114,000 people signed a petition to start a referendum process. Every conversation that I have with folks, CopCity is eventually mentioned. But we're not having depth in our spread in the StopCopCity movement. We're not, people aren't taking day-to-day actions in relation to the StopCopCity movement. And I think that's because we have failed to ask ourselves, how do we get working people involved, and how do we allow on-ramps, both culturally and materially, for them to come through? Have we provided the material conditions, or have we linked up with already pre-existing networks, and have we fertilized those so then people can go out or people can resist in their own ways? I think one of the missing links is labor. Without the labor of Black and brown people in Atlanta, there wouldn't be a CopCity, there wouldn't be gentrification, there wouldn't be the most invasive surveillance system in North America and top 10 in the world in the creation of the SHIELD camera system, and there wouldn't be rampant gentrification that uproots Black and brown people out of the city. A lot of the companies that are involved with the creation of CopCity are based in Atlanta. UPS, Waffle House, Delta, Home Depot. The people that build the wealth for those companies are the same ones that are going to be surveilled, are the same ones that are going to be followed by cops, are the same ones that feel less safe when a police officer uses Israeli tactics of like having their blue lights shine out during the night while they drive through their neighborhoods. And StopCopCity hasn't done the best job in regards to linking up with the labor struggle, because on one end, there is engagement with community, there's rallies, there's direct actions, and that's been directly against the contractors, the state, and those have been great moves, right? But the Atlanta way is still there. You know, we've metaphorically put water in the glue that is the Atlanta way trying to reform itself post-2020, but it still stands. Why is that, right? How does the city reproduce itself? How does the city gain the wealth from the labor of these people to then inflict more harm onto the same people? One thing to note is that, for example, in UPS, it's unionized, right? Under the Teamsters. UPS has board members in the Atlanta Police Foundation. UPS has board members in the Atlanta Committee for Progress, which is a major gentrification arm of this like public-private partnerships that exist in the city. Where is labor there? Why isn't there slowdowns and strikes at UPS, forcing the hand of the company to maybe disassociate itself with the APF or with the ACP or just with the Atlanta Way in general? I think it's a question that we should all ask, both from militants in the StopCopCity movement. Where are we with labor? Where are we with the MARTA drivers? Where are we with the UPS workers? Where are we with the Waffle House workers? Where are we with the hotel and the concierge and like all the like kind of like the events that make Atlanta a destination? Where are we as organizers, as militants in the StopCopCity movement with them? But then with the labor leaders that do exist in Atlanta or even across the country, where are they? The Palestine Labor Organizations Confederation had a call, demanding, begging for labor across the world to halt the ongoing genocide, to prevent the shipments of arms, the creation of weapons for Israel to Palestine. Not a peep. I mean, there was a few unions around Europe that did some stuff. But where was the AFL-CIO or AFL-CIA, if you know your history? Where's the Teamsters? Where are these unions? All these little demands of like, or rather proclamations that we want a ceasefire now. It's going to be a year in October. So it's a question I think for all of us to ask is like, where is labor in this? I was recently reading Black Reconstruction by W. Du Bois, and I was kind of struck by labor's sidelining on the issue of slavery, even back then in the 1840s. They viewed slavery more as a competition to free labor than the real realization that the black masses also need to be liberated, that also have the capacity to go on general strike, that also have the capacity for revolutionary organization. So it's a historical problem in the United States and something that I think labor unions need to confront. So I guess the tie of that all in is that I think labor and StopCopCity and other movements in the United States have made great strides in some ways. But as some of our comrades here already have pointed out, there's still a lot more work to do, both in seeing indigenous people as part of the collective effort to dismantle this empire, to realizing one's position in the city if you are a gentrifier and you're changing the makeup of a city, right? One last thing, and this is kind of a little bit of on the other side of this conversation, is just how international this repression is. I mean, I mentioned Waimapu earlier. In so-called Chile, they use anti-terrorism laws against Mapuche organizers and activists. They declare them terrorists. They put them in jail without any bail or anything, because there is no bail in Chile. In Kanaki, they labeled the indigenous independence movement leaders as gang leaders, which is very similar to the RICO stuff that is happening in Atlanta right now. Suddenly, a political resistance is viewed as gangs. Suddenly, political resistance is viewed as terrorism. You see that in Waimapu. You see that in the indigenous lands all over Latin America and South America, in Ecuador, in Brazil, Argentina, in Peru, right? In Mexico and Chiapas and everything. And you see that all over the world, right? In Kenya and Bangladesh, the people protesting against high cost of living, protesting against hierarchical structures, protesting against the inequality and the literally like impossibility of living life, being labeled as terrorists, being labeled as outside agitators. So there's a playbook developing in the world right now. And that playbook is to delegitimize resistance, to label resistance as other, to label resistance as something foreign, and to, like, as one comrade put it earlier, to put us against each other. So, yeah, I think in summation with all of this, I think there is a lot of deep thought we need to do together, loving deep thought, critical deep thought. But we need to like think about what are we doing in our moment, either if you're in labor or you're in something else, and then also look abroad and also look in our own context. We don't look enough at what's going on in Black and Indigenous and Arab spaces. We don't do enough work to look at what's going on internationally. How do we bring these connections? How do we start to create a counterforce? Because we got to win, and we will win. But we will win if we make these connections, if we make these realizations, if we build stronger movements, and if we support the infrastructure creation for other parts of movement, especially for marginalized people. That's all I gotta say. Thank you so much.
Buenas tardes, good afternoon. My name's Eva Cardenas. I come by way of what we know now as Mexico City or the Gran Tenochtitlan. I migrated to Creek Muskogee territories, which we also know as Atlanta, Georgia, about 26 years ago. And as many of who have experienced the immigrant life, once you learn English, one of the things that you do a lot with your community is you organize, even if we don't call it that. We talk about wage theft, we talk about OSHA rights, we talk about workers' rights, we talk about immigrant rights. So a lot of my experience in organizing has come from the need, the necessity to advocate for my people, to build communities, to support those that are like in the front lines. And I think when we talk about Cop City, right, oftentimes we kind of get this narrow vision of like, this is the issue, this is how we gotta go, and we are very reactive. And I think we as a young group of folks that are now organizing, right, because organizing didn't just start in 2010 or in the 2000s. Organizing and resistance is something that our people have had to contend ever since the colonizers arrived. And so understanding our history, understanding our struggles, and understanding the struggles of other communities that have been fighting that fight is essential and important as to how, one, we identify those tactics that are being repackaged, because that is what capitalism does. It packages and repackages things and sells it back to you. And so understanding that terrain is important because, one, it's about knowing history, but it's also about humbling ourselves in the idea that we are not here to save people, but we are here to support and fighting in that defense for our people, right? We don't claim to know what's best. We can read all the books that we want about theory, but if there's no praxis, we are not organizing. And I think it's important for people to understand that, because that was one of the biggest lessons in not just Cop City in Atlanta, but anytime we talk about organizing. If we cannot support meeting our people's immediate needs, we're not gonna get them to that meeting. We're not gonna get them to care about the forest. If they got bills to pay, I don't care about a forest. I want to make sure my lights are on, right? So we need to be critical in how we are organizing and why we're organizing. We're not just organizing to stop a Cop City from being built. We're organizing to educate our people as to why abolition is important. We're working to talk to our people about why things keep inflating and people are making bank while we're starving. We're trying to make those connections because it doesn't just talk about indigenous people, immigrant people, black folks. All of us are going through these struggles. We need to name it, we need to identify who those targets are, and we need to be very clear as to how we're developing our language when we're talking about these issues. If we can explain things to people in like a 10-second bite as to why we're fighting this struggle, we're not there yet. We need to be able to simplify things because our people are not dumb. Our people just got to pay bills. Our people got to do things. And we need to make sure that we encourage the conditions so our people can organize, so our people can build the capacities so that they themselves can continue to move in the movement. And so I wanted to start by saying that because in the amount of times that I've organized and have had to sit in panels or hear other people talk, it oftentimes feels like this is very cyclical. It's not like we haven't been here before. As other comrades have named, it isn't like our people don't hold that story of struggle and history, right? But what we do know is that we're also at a point where everyone is able to see how this capitalist system is failing us. From the pandemic, that was a very clear indication of this government does not give a fuck about us, and therefore we need to organize. So understanding how we're using things like direct action as organizing models and tools to bring people in, but also having an on-ramping process on how we're supporting those folks, right? We see this a lot when we have mass mobilizations. We have an influx of young folks that are really interested and activated, but there isn't really a way for them to then build that capacity and continue moving forward. And so I think what I'm trying to get at the meat of this, because what I'm assuming, and this could be a false assumption, is that most of these people, most folks in this space are organizing to some degree, right? We're organizing for one or two or many other things. And what I wanna encourage us to do is to have more deeper conversations, as the comrade mentioned, around how we are building across movements. How are we moving away from sort of the dogmatic, like theory of things and actually thinking, who are those targets? who are those board members that live in my town? And it might not be directly impacted to my issue, but I'm willing to bet that if you make some research, there's connecting dots there. And that is the importance, right? As organizers, as seasoned organizers, it is important that we understand what our people are up against on the daily and encouraging to shift those conditions so they can make it to the meeting. Whether that's having interpretation services, whether that's having childcare, whether that's having a Zoom space for other people, how are we building that, right? Because we can sit here and talk about what's wrong and how I could do it better, but again, highlighting what folks have named, what are we building towards? What are we modeling as organizers that we want to see in our community so other people know that it is possible in real time for us to have all the things that we need, not at the expense of others, but just because we are able, this Mother Earth provides. We just package it and then say, nope, if you don't fit that quota, if you don't fit that income bracket, you can't get it. And I think it's important, the last thought that I'll say, that we challenge the norms that we have been conditioned under. That we challenge how we're talking about the issues, even within our little pods of radical folks, and then how we're challenging the messages that our communities are getting fed every day through the news, through the radio, right? We talk about this like othering, we talk about the labeling of terrorism, like we've seen all of this. And we know that next thing that comes up, they will find a way to say, even if you march in the little route that we allow you to march, if you don't have the right stick, you're a terrorist. And it's important that we challenge what that means. If we live in a democracy, why is it bad for us to have a critique about our government, right? If we do live in a democracy, why is it that certain people aren't allowed to go to certain places? Because they might not have a sign anymore, but if you can't meet that bracket, you're not getting into certain spaces, right? If you are a working class person and get into a car accident or lose your job, you're this close to homelessness. So how are we bridging those issues for folks to understand how we need to move together? I want to thank you all for the time, and I'll pass it over to my other comrade.
Hello, my name is Lorenzo Serna. Hey, whoa, dang. I didn't expect that. I'm Chicane. My pronouns are they, them. I'm from this little town called Crystal City, Texas, which during the Chicano movement had walkouts. And we're trying to get representation in their schools. There's a bunch of students organizing. And those students were kidnapped by the Texas Rangers. They were dropped in the desert, as soon as they get home, interrogated without parents, And so I'm living in a reality where the people who look like me, act like me, are cheering on a baseball team of the people who used to kidnap my people, literally out there. And that's what I'm working in. Like, that is the environment I'm in. And so I wanted to acknowledge that. I want to also acknowledge all my ancestors who actually fought so I could be here before you. I have a master's. That's only because of them, for them allowing me that space and time to be able to do this. And everyone that I've met along the way who's had a conversation with me. That's what I'm going to share with you, is all of that on all of you. So thank you. I'm currently the director of tactical media here at the Indian Collective. I deal with narrative a lot. It's what I think about. I come from storytellers, educators, healers, and now I view my work as storytelling. We used to do oral storytelling. That's how all of our knowledge was passed down. And I see the work that I'm doing as an extension of that. And I've done this sort of work across multiple movements now, including ones that I've organized, and ones that I was just happened upon. And one of the things I feel like, I've been sitting up here like, what am I going to say? Holy. But just the importance of telling your story because someone's going to tell it. And also that opportunity and the selected people who are able to tell your story, the ability to see yourself in what you're doing is really important. I can mention movements where I didn't see anything for a month. You're just working. And I'm sure some of you know that. You're just like, oh, we got to go. And you probably don't even know what you're doing, right? You just got to achieve this task. You're going to achieve this task. You're going to do this. You got to get to sleep somehow, and it's just madness upon madness. And then I remember going home and seeing these videos. And I'm like, oh, shit, this is what we're doing. I didn't know, we're just out there fighting every day. And so it's just important that you think about it. You're also showing yourself what you're doing because you're caught in it. And some of you might not even know what you're doing in the sense of how big it really is. And so in that work, I've worked with multiple movements that became international. I'll talk about Standing Rock momentarily, and probably for a little bit, but Standing Rock, obviously international movement, but also international. Me and my colleague Demetrius were talking about this because multiple tribes were there. Tribes who have generational beef, who had not worked together, wanted to talk to each other for a long time, or in that space somehow working together and holding that space together. And I think it's important to acknowledge that we are in a nation of nations. And they're out there, and we are organizing with each other, and they're organizing with themselves, and we're all in this. We're all in this together. And then as far as, I think it's important too, like when I'm talking about narrative, that the work we're doing against the police, again, because they're doing it against us, is like they're working the narrative as well. It's Standing Rock, I was part of an organization called Unicorn Ride at the time, which was a very focused work around Standing Rock, and we were trying to daily update people on what was happening. And we weren't worried about propaganda, and I never really am, because what we're doing is right. So I'm like, I don't need to figure out the right words. Just show me what you're doing, let me film you, give me permission, and I will capture your words, and we were given that access a lot, and that's why you're able to see so much content come out. And there was a lot of work that was done in consent, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done in media to think about these things, but also to acknowledge that when you're telling people not to film you, the people who are gonna film you are your enemies. The people who aren't gonna film you are your friends. And I want everyone to think about that, and it's important too, like when we teach, when we do trainings, the first thing I say is there is no safe media. Like you're gonna spend, how do we do this? How do we tell this, not criminalize ourselves? Like no, like this already unsafe. You all know, it's just a fact. And that's the reality we're working in. And we need to acknowledge it. And understand that also these are the tools we're using. And then understand too that the tools we're using are our enemies as well, right? Social media is not gonna save you. It's gonna basically eventually eliminate your movement, right? Eventually you're all just gonna talk to yourselves, and it has nothing to do with what you're doing. It's because they're trying to make money off you, and that's their goal. So it's a tool. And I think I always want to say these things, and I was thinking about what do I really offer up here? Like what are the perceptions I can give? And it's really that, just being able to watch as people are trying to battle and tell folks what is happening on the ground, and then watching a whole other layer of people trying to grift off that to make money, and then a whole other layer trying to grift off that to gain organizational power. Another layer, so it's like there's the thing that's happening on the ground, which many of you have been involved with, and then there's everyone around there. And what you're telling them is what they're gonna see. And so we have to figure out how to tell them that truth. And I think a lot of the work too that I think about is the context of movements, right? We're talking about Standing Rock. We're in Chicago, holy history of resistance, right? Right? Turns out, plains of North Dakota, holy fuck. History of resistance, just right there, plains. There was just hills. History of resistance. There was graves on those hills. And so I think that to try to understand how do we continue to update where we are at while holding the past and bringing it with us, but then also knowing that the people that we're technically working against at times, which is law enforcement, are doing the same. I spend a lot of time in spaces where I listen to people talk about, how stupid the cops are, and that's fine. Like, fuck the police, but like, they're human beings just like you. They're thinking about shit. They're watching your shit. They're gonna make their plans based on your shit. And I say that at Standing Rock, afterwards, those police went out speaking to her all over the country. I think they even went to Atlanta. I'm really bad at holding this mic. Went to Atlanta and did presentations on how to dismantle the movement. How did we do it? What did we experience? What can you do? What you should prepare? And then when you look at what happened I think it was like 2 years later at Stop Line 3, the movement against pipeline in Minnesota. Again, massive police, totally different tactics. And I would argue their tactics were based on making sure the stories that were written about what happened within the allowable context of what society expects. And society does expect the police to beat somebody up. Society does expect the police to kill people. Society, and so they understood that, and they shift their tactics to make sure there was not private security beating people with bats. There wasn't private security sitting at, in their photographs with armed. It was always the police, because that made the stories be always the police. I think it was brilliant on their part, shitty, but it's what they did. I think that's what they did. And so it's just all your tactics you're using, I'm sure all of you, maybe some of you have this experience, your first deploy always goes real smooth, the lockdown was cool, maybe it lasted forever, you're able to do stuff for a little bit. Second time's not gonna be the same, And the idea that it's gonna be the same is just a mistake. Because you have to keep imagining what we're gonna do next, because they are taking notes. At Stop Line 3, they showed up with a vehicle to cut people out that they had pre-prepped, right? They already had it in station. They had their teams ready. They knew what they're going to have to deal with, and then they dealt with it. And so I just think it's important that like we have to keep iterating whatever we're going to do to make it look like liberation, or to get to liberation however it's possible. And it's probably not going to look the same. And the other thing I'll say about that too is like, every time a movement begins, there's comparisons to the last movement. And I think that is not good. I don't think that's the thing we should do, because the next movement is where we're at now. And yes, the past happened and we're going to bring that along, but the space of whatever we're taking in this moment has to be allowed to be what it's going to be. And all of these comparisons to the past are like, they're good in the sense that we have to keep that past there, but we can't start mimicking it because it's not going to work in the current reality that we're in. And so I think everyone out there, I didn't even hit my timer. I had this whole timer. You got me? Yeah, this thing. 3 more minutes, all right. You know, I just think like, whew, this derailed myself a little bit. But yeah, just like, you know, just, I always tell people like, at the beginning of your movement, remember it, because everyone's gonna try to change while you're there. But like, you have to, whenever you're doing stuff, allow it to have its space and time to define itself for what it is, but it also should be defined in the fact that resistance, if existence is resistance, that means that every day, it's every day. Struggle is every day. I'm waking up in the struggle, I'm going to sleep in the struggle. I'm trying to figure out with all of you how to one day wake up and just be at liberation, right? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Every day I'm trying to figure that out because that's what I want for me and for everyone else. And so I think it's just important that we are in conversation, we are acknowledging that we're telling our own stories, because if we don't, somebody else is going to for us eventually, right? And you're all going to be unhappy, and maybe you'll be unhappy it was told by yourself, but at least you were able to set it for a moment. And those moments are very few, and they just disappear. And then the last thing I wanted to say too, just about context and history and narrative, is we were, you know, Standing Rock was an international movement. I mean, we can just easily say that. I think people there wanted to like stop a pipeline, so then maybe we'll be like, we can now stop pipelines, right? I'm always like, we're trying to show each other what's possible. We're trying to show each other what's possible. This is what we're gonna do. Maybe somebody else will do this. This is what we're gonna do this. Maybe somebody else will do this, because we're all gotta keep trying, right? Because shit's been hard many times. But also, I think it's important to acknowledge that the land that Standing Rock was happening in I think it was in 1908, or they flooded it because the United States Army Corps built dams. And I'm not sure the exact year, so I apologize. So the land that we're actually there defending, that river does not look like that. Like the Missouri River does not look the way it does right now. It looks that way because the government had already flooded it and had already destroyed all the best lands, all the villages that were along the river, they were already gone. And so when I was there, what I heard is like, they're coming back again. And that is the history that indigenous people hold, is they're coming back again. They already came, and now they're coming back again in a new way, with a new promise, with a new offer. In the end, we know where that leads. And that's why I think many of us are here, is we know where that goes. Like for me, it goes to like erasure of the past, erasure of religion, erasure of history, erasure. That's where it goes. And that's what they're afraid of. Because all indigenous people hold, you know, another world is possible. All those indigenous people hold that world. It isn't possible. It existed. It already happened. You know, that's what we're holding. Where I'm saying that is like, I know it's real, because that's where my people came from, is that world. And that's what they're trying to destroy, because that is the threat. The threat of a place where we can see each other, we can talk to each other, we can move together, we can figure out what does justice look like to us? Well, we better figure that out, because it isn't this, but that's what we were doing. And so I think I just wanted to say those things, that like, don't forget, somebody, whatever you're doing, should be holding a camera, and other people shouldn't. Not everyone needs a cell phone. At Standing Rock, it would have been nice if everybody who's across the river just came on over, and then we would have probably taken the hill, but no, there was 100, 200, 300 people just filming us, I guess. And so, so make a media team, empower them to cover you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you all so much, for everything that you've shared in this space. I know as a local organizer in Chicago, I've learned so much just from what was shared. And I'm very excited to open it up to the floor to hear questions for people who may want to speak to the ideas that have been shared at this moment. For those who would like to ask a question, if you could just please raise your hand. I think there'll be someone with a mic that will go around, and we'll try to gather as many people as we can. For those who do get a chance to get on the mic, this is a large room, and we're just asking folks, to land the plane as quickly as we can and get to our questions so we can return the mic to these wonderful speakers. To start, I think we have someone right here in the front row. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my name is Andres. I want to thank y'all. It was very emotional for me to be in the presence of y'all because I'm Mexican, but I'm struggling with my identity. I don't know if I'm like Aztec, Mayan, and like I'm learning that Mexican is not a race. We have the blood of the colonizer and the colonized. We have Spanish blood, we got indigenous blood, and some of us have African roots. So I want to thank y'all for coming here, and I wonder if this is a conversation that's happening between the Latinx and indigenous community, like about identity, that we're actually related, like we're indigenous too. So like that was my question, if those kind of conversations are happening.
Yeah, I want to say something, and then I know there's a couple people on this panel with something to say to it too. I can say, like, within Indian Collective, we leaned into that right away. We made a decision when we created our organization that we weren't going to acknowledge the colonial borders that divide indigenous people. And therefore, that's what made our work happening on all sides of these borders. That's why since the founding of our work, we worked in so-called, Mexico, Canada, American Samoa, Guam, all of these different places. And in this particular issue, we recognize and have an analysis around what is considered to be indigenous people. Because the reality is, if we don't, like, there's some Native organizations who will only embrace other, groups of people that are federally recognized Indians. But I'm like, that's perpetuating settler colonialism, because all of a sudden we decide to allow the United States government to fucking decide who the indigenous people are or aren't, So leaning into that, one, it's a big deal that one of the biggest indigenous movement organizations that's existed in recent history made a political decision to open a pathway for that to be not only a conversation, but part of the praxis, part of how we go about doing this work. And that's why there's certain people who are on this team, who are sitting at this table, because it is part of our the praxis that we have to continue to have as a movement, because the practice of continuing to work with one another actually dismantles that and creates a space to include the full scope of indigeneity.
Okay, you go ahead.
Okay, well, thank you for the question. I think as someone who was displaced very young from Mexico, and I had to move to Georgia, the deep south, and we didn't have a lot of Chicanos back then. I remember being very young and stealing books from the library that were all about the Chicano movement. And then after that, I kind of just started to read more. But one of the things that I do want to just encourage around identities is kind of what Nick is saying around, like, how are we holding, not even like as organizations or within the movement, but within our own families, like how are we holding those conversations about where are people coming from? Like I have had many conversations with my grandparents who, when they were still in this realm, and I was very grateful for, who were able to tell me, our people come from these particular lands, our people come from these particular towns, and going to those towns, right? And also, like, that even in itself is a privilege, but understanding and getting a little bit more around our culture is important. But I think, at least for the Mexicas or Mexicanos that are in this room, I will name that talking about being indigenous in Mexico is a no-no. Like, we are heavily colonized into thinking that we want to better the race. We are the raza cósmica. We are, we don't want to identify as indigenous or black folks. And I think that there is a level of conversation and nuance that needs to happen at our communities. And as organizers, it's important for us to create those spaces. Those are not going to happen by themselves. One, because it is part of this system's culture to erase who we are. That's why they push assimilation so hard. That's why white supremacy is a problem, because even for white people, it demands that you erase your own lineage to your own peoples and traditions. And so that is a conversation that we need to be having with our people. Where are people coming from? Where are our histories? Where are our stories of resistance, right? How is it that a Chicana Mexicana is here in Chicago right now? Like, what happened? And it's important. And so the last thing I'll say that I think a lot about when people ask me this, Chavela Vargas is this singer from Dominica, Santo Domingo, I think. But she always identified as Mexicana. And when they asked her why, she said, because Mexicans are born wherever the fuck they want to be born. So I just want to name that. But yeah, that's it.
I'm good.
Wonderful, thank you so much. We have another person up here in the front. Oh, were you going to the back? Oh, sorry.
Hello, my name is Celinda Guerrero. Comrade Yazzie is from my same homeland, same region. I organize nationally, and I remember it was important to me to go to Atlanta, to go visit the encampment, to be there, to plant trees. Like, I wanted to be with comrades on the ground and learn. And then I come to find out they built 2 cop cities in New Mexico while I was in Atlanta. and I'm just curious about, like, the mapping, the communications that are happening, the ways that we can communicate with each other around the way that they're conspiring to build even more, and the ways of resistance that we can build with each other across the movement, so that we don't make those misses again. You know, I could have also been invested in building resistance in my own state had I only known, you know. And so I just wanted to kind of think more about that, and about the ways that we can communicate, cross-pollinate also.
Yeah, I think it's like a lot to do with like visiting each other. I mean, it's so easy to go on Twitter, or like so easy to go on Signal, or whatever ways of communication and text, but we just gotta visit. We gotta see each other, you know. I had the privilege of going to a Sexagretas encuentro in Albuquerque in New Mexico, and I was so honored to like learn about like the resistance that's going on in New Mexico in relation to uranium mining, in relation to all these other struggles. The internet kind of like gives us this illusion that we don't need to walk. We can just literally look at our phone and build connection, but we need to like walk to these places of struggle. And I think what was great about what you were saying is that in walking to Atlanta, you've realized something local. And I think that's a massive credit. And I think it's something that we need to keep doing as organizers. We need to keep moving around the country and talking to each other and building these relations with each other. And going beyond just okay, cool, I know one person from Indian Collective, I know one person from this organizing group and that crew. No, that's like cliquey shit. Who cares? It's something deeper. It's like, I know your name. I know where you come from. I know what the things you're interested in, and I know about your local struggles as much as you know my local struggles. Because sometimes I feel like in some organizing spaces we get like lost in the clout. We get lost in like oh cool, I know I have these short list of people, or oh cool, I was in this city and that city. But did you like get to really know the people in those cities? Did you get to really understand the struggles? And did those people understand your struggles? Like, were you being vulnerable? Were you being honest? So I feel like to answer that question of like, how can we become more aware and stuff, it's just being here. And beyond just being here, talking, like making new friends, making new connections, being vulnerable, you know, sharing those vulnerabilities, sharing perspectives of life and like all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, I think now that you know that there's cop cities in Albuquerque, or rather in New Mexico in general, now it's time to get to the work, and now it's time to like connect with other folks that have experiences and other folks that might have critiques or praises about what's going on in Atlanta. And like lastly is to never, and I think someone else mentioned this too, is to just not copy and paste something that's happened historically or copy and paste something that's happened in another context, because all our contexts are different. The strategies might be similar in some cases. The tactics might be similar in some cases, but the local context to New Mexico is so different to the local context in Georgia or the context from Atlanta to Chicago, right? So it's about not getting lost in the aesthetics of the tactics or the aesthetics of the strategy, because I think some people are like, oh, that's really sexy, I want to do that. Okay, sure, but like maybe those people didn't really fuck with that strategy in that context that it happened. But you have to investigate that first before you just blindly do it. So it's a lot about like knowing your context, knowing how these like specific moves pan out, and yeah, eventually experimenting with it, and maybe you realize it's not it. But yeah, I hope that answers your question, and I'm curious to hear if anyone else has any other things to say.
The last thing I'll add, I mean, I think it's strategic for a lot of these cop cities to like kind of be on the low, and then they become implemented. So I think like that's one thing to clock. I would also say that it's important for us to understand how, like, when we are in these spaces, how are we sharing that information? How are we staying in touch? How are we building community? But then now that we know, right, like there are about at least 56, from what I understand, planned different cop cities, 68, right? And we only have 50 states. So like I think that also the piece of other like conversation that needs to happen is how is this prison industrial complex system sort of like becoming a different thing, right? Before it was like dungeons and cells, and now we're seeing, like, especially with immigrant right folks, right, they're getting the different ankle bracelets. Like there's different levels of surveillance, there's different levels of cop cities that are like now shifting into a different sort of form. And so I think it's important for us to be clear about that, right? Cop city isn't gonna look like just taking out a forest, building a playground for the police. It could look like many other things. So I think it's important for us to keep an eye on that.
Yeah, I wanted to add to that too, because at first, when everything was first happening with Cop City at the beginning, I was like, well, what's the big deal? There's fucking forts all over this country, all on our land, all over the place. Our place has been militarized, you know? And I felt like there was a disconnect, because once they build these forts, they don't go away, and the impact of them don't go away. You know, those are the same forts they took our people to and killed them. Crazy Horse was stabbed in the back at Fort Robinson, Nebraska, at a fort right between a whole bunch of Native nations, you know? And so I keep thinking about in the Stop Cop City movement, we have to continue to broaden our understanding of how it connects to all of these different things. Because if you look at like South Dakota, I was like, shit, they don't even need a cop city out there. The whole state is, you know, you got 10% of the population in South Dakota, 10% of the population in South Dakota is indigenous, but 51% of the people incarcerated in the whole state of South Dakota are indigenous. The whole system is working that way. And so we have to continue to think about these nuances, kind of like what Eva was talking about, and we have to think about the interconnectionness of how it impacts the daily lives of our people, and get into the weeds of it too. You got to nerd out a little bit and understand some of the nuances. Where are these contracts coming from? You know, one of the you know, as we're sitting here thinking about all these cop cities across America, a lot of times we're sitting back as a movement and we're waiting for an opportunity to engage in direct action, as opposed for, you know, opportunity to be organizing right now upstream. Because these cop cities are not being just, you know, built at the snap of a fingers. They're making financial decisions, and decision makers are making decisions about funding and the building of cop cities across America way far before our movement is activated. And so we have to really be thinking upstream, of how are we gonna advocate upstream? How are we gonna influence upstream? How are we gonna use, to create interventions upstream? So we're not down here just always fighting at the point of construction. But it takes organizing, it takes research, it takes learning, follow the money and go back to it. So I just wanted to say that.
Feel free to come up. Do we have a mic here for Joel?
I just want to add what you said. No, when I heard about Cop City and my son at the forest, I said, "What is the big deal? It's a forest." But I realized, even after his death, the love that he has for nature, the love that he has for environment. So what I wanted to add is that not only the issue is around Cop City. My child, he died defending the forest, defending the environment. He loved nature. He loved that forest. He was happy to be in the forest and defending and giving his life for the environment. So for many of you, I'm worried that, and many of your children, in a few years, if you don't have an air conditioner, you're going to die. Because the temperatures in many places is getting higher and higher and longer. So here in Chicago, we are lucky that a couple of days we got 900 and 99, 100, but other places is burning out. That's part of the struggle that he gave his life defending the forest. On a personal side, we are just giving a little fight in the legal issues around Cop City, because one of the things that happen around the world is that any environmental effort is overcome by police, by a structure of power, political and economical power. And that's what happened in Cop City. And one of the excuses, at least in the United States, is that doing that is domestic terrorism. So if a presidential campaign gets $100 million in 2 days, they are not terrorists. But if a community and forest defender get money in order to bail out forest defender, they are the mafia. They are getting the money like Al Capone or whatever. So we are fighting for people that are accused of domestic terrorism. I pray that we are able to fight the fight for you, overcoming the idea that this is the domestic terrorism. Meeting here is domestic terrorism because we are, or you are, and all of us are talking about organizing. And that is domestic terrorism. So the idea is that hopefully we are able to confront the authorities using the law as well in a good way, understanding that Tortuguita was assassinated in a public place, that excessive force was used against him. And you know what is the main thing that hopefully we're going to beat is that Tortuguita died having his rights, having his voice, all the voices that we are able to raise here in the future. That's the First Amendment. So he died defending a cause. So what you are doing, I know that you have much in your plate. And I appreciate, I honor you because you are making an effort for you, for your culture, for your people, for your children, for your grandchildren. So keep the fight going. We're going to try to do as much as possible to beat those motherfuckers that killed my son.
you so much for sharing that. Before we return to questions, I just want to ask folks to repeat after me. We will honor all our martyrs.
We will honor all our martyrs.
All our children, sons, and daughters.
All our children, sons, and daughters.
We will honor all our martyrs.
We will honor all our martyrs.
All our parents, mothers, fathers.
All our parents, mothers, fathers.
We will honor all our martyrs.
We will honor all our martyrs.
All our children, sons, and daughters.
All our children, sons, and daughters.
We will honor all our martyrs.
We will honor all our martyrs.
All our parents, mothers, fathers.
All our parents, mothers, fathers.
Thank you so much for sharing those words in this space.
Hi, can you all hear me? Nice. My name is Winter, and I'm from Nodotol. We are an organization fighting against U.S. imperialism and for the self-determination of Korea. To the first speaker, I really, really appreciate your reflections and criticisms that come from being part of the movement, and also your really important intervention around class analysis of CopCity. That means we're thinking about who's organized, who's driving the organizing, and how do the visions of the working class actually drive our movements. And so I think I'm from New York, so we are also hearing rumblings of CopCity being built. But as we know, the NYPD, what you said about a city being already a CopCity, like that's, I totally resonate with that. I'm just curious, upon reflection of this moment, I'm wondering if the CopCity movement is considering shifts in organizing to try to bring the people that are core to Atlanta's economy into the project of CopCity. Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for that question. I always tell people I owe Atlanta everything, and so I'm always trying to live a life that's an homage to that city. And so the question of the struggle against CopCity is constantly in my mind, because it's a question about the future of Atlanta that's being in part determined by people who are not stationed in Atlanta. And while we are incredibly grateful and humbled and in honor of all of the people who have come to this city, we do want a movement that determines the future of Atlanta for the people who love and live and make up Atlanta, for the people who come from the very bottom of Atlanta. So when you ask if people are considering switching tactics, constantly. We are constantly trying to improve and adapt our tactics to include the people who are not only of this city, but will be most harmed by CopCity. The people who are in the immediate neighborhoods around CopCity, that is a Black working class neighborhood. And yet our movement doesn't necessarily reflect the makeup of that neighborhood. It doesn't necessarily reflect the makeup of our entire city. Particularly as like a Black organizer, as a graduate of an HBCU, a historically Black college and university, I feel like I'm sitting at a really difficult tension where there are moments where it's just like, okay, we need to go talk to the Black people. Let's send the Black organizers. And I'm like over here with like the cool anarchist kids. And I'm also like, none of y'all are from here. Why are you in my neighborhood? And I'm over here with the Black people in our communities. And they're like, why are y'all talking about CopCity? As Eva poignantly pointed out, I can't pay rent. Y'all are talking about a forest and the metro system doesn't work. Y'all are talking about a forest and my kid's been locked up on the mental health ward of Grady and I don't know how to reach them or talk to them. So yes, very honestly, we are always considering changing our tactics and how we need to change our tactics. And we get so much inspiration from Palestine. We get so much inspiration from Kenya and Bangladesh. But what I will also say is like, we don't know the answer right now. And I think telling the truth about the fact that we don't know the right next move will get us a lot closer to something that's powerful and will work, instead of this valorization that's currently happening where it's like, we gotta move like Atlanta. Everywhere else is like, we gotta move like Atlanta. Atlanta's a hot ass mess on the ground. And that's just the truth. We're very tired. We've been very repressed. There's a lot of conflict that we're having trouble overcoming, but it's really hard for us to tell the truth about what's actually happened, about the truth about our distance between ourselves and our neighbors, because a really beautiful picture, word to media, has been painted across the country about this armed struggle between Atlanta and the state. It's true. There was armed struggle between Atlanta and the state. It's true. People are fighting back and are in direct conflict with the state. It's true. We are pushing the contractors back on their heels. But what's also true is that when I stand on the bus stop and talk to old ladies about Cop City, they're like, okay, but when are y'all going to start the movement to avenge Jimmy Hill? When are y'all going to start the movement to avenge Alexia Christian, who was killed in the back of an APD cop car? When are y'all going to start the movement to avenge any of these little black Atlanta kids who soon won't have African American history courses, AP courses? And so that was a lot of rambling, but it's because I really care a lot. I really care about my city. I really care about the people who made Atlanta, Atlanta, and who will be sacrificed first in this machine should it succeed. And it's a humble offering that we are all looking in different directions about the best way to go forward, but the direction I'm looking in is the bottom.
I think we have time for one more quick question, and then we'll be wrapping up. There's an individual in the back with a white hat.
Hi, I'm Marcus with Struggle for Media, and I did kind of have a question that kind of like seems to branch across the medium of, or at least a myriad of you all. So I wanted to start with the gentleman from the Indian Collective. When you talked about like kind of like economic sovereignty, and I know that especially when land back movement is like very much a legal effort that allows for like the actual strength for your own decision making. I'm kind of wondering where that economic sovereignty comes from, like just being able to start own businesses as you see fit, all the way to how do roads, bridges, pipelines coming in and out of your communities and having your control over how those things are built or not built. But then also to how does that extend to that like economic sovereignty to like being able to actually solve for, well, how do I pay rent? There might need to be a movement, but are there economic opportunities? And like, this is where it says like, when you said like, yeah, we got a nonprofit, but like, fuck with me, we're revolutionaries. Like, how do nonprofit worker co-ops, you know, do you see that as like some avenues to kind of even like get a foothold so we can start, you know, building power? And like, it also kind of like answering some of the questions of like, how do I pay rent? Well, like, hey, show up at this address on Monday. We got to, you know, whether it's a mop and an apron or training programs to build onto something else, you know, like, where does that economic opportunity actually like hit the ground, do you think?
Yeah, so when I talk about the infrastructure that we built at Indian Collective, we took a lot of that into consideration, because we looked at like the frontline struggles that exist across indigenous communities. And if it wasn't militarization first, through capitalism, many of our communities have been held economic hostage, right? So they become at the whims of, you know, the mining corporations, you know, the nuclear corporations, the oil companies. And so when we built Indian Collective, it's actually an ecosystem organization. And so we operate our own loan fund. We got our own folks giving our own loans to things, to enterprises in our communities. Those are enterprises that are owned by tribes. Those are enterprises that are owned by workers. Those are enterprises that are owned by directly impacted communities. And so while we're still here on the front line, and even when we're in DC, or in the DNC here, you know, we have a whole team of people that are working with communities, helping move resources, because the banks, they're not going to fund those types of things. We got to be able to build our own mechanisms to fund our own types of things. And so, and we've helped incubate different models too. We've helped incubate all kinds of different models of community land trusts as a mechanism for self-governance in communities. That means that we're funding stuff that's not super sexy, like the creation of a community land trust and the paperwork that takes to do it, to make sure that the people there are representative of that so that they have a mechanism to receive land. And so, all the different ways that's always been the vision. I mean, Indian Collective has invested into stuff like, sustainable fisheries. Two of the largest tribally managed buffalo herds in the world is both on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation and the Rosebud Indian Reservation. And those were a result of huge land back efforts. But at the end of the day, that helped create food security for some of our nations for a generation down there. And so making big moves like that, thinking like entrepreneurs, but thinking about how do you build models for community wealth, not just models for individual wealth, because community wealth models push back against old school capitalism. And so, there's a lot of stuff that's on the internet about our work, but we probably only tell like 5 or 10% of the work that we do. And so building that mechanisms and making sure that you own and control the infrastructure. Because otherwise, if you have somebody else do that, they don't have the same politics. They don't have the same politics, so they're not going to fund that type of business because they're not going to see that business for what it is you're talking about connected to, a specific struggle.
Well, thank you all so much, and thank you to all of our panelists for this wonderful discussion. Just to kind of have some closing thoughts on what was shared. I was really inspired by one of the first comments that were made as we opened up this conversation, where Mango reminded us, anywhere where we are resisting becomes a front line in the war against imperialism. And it really calls to the way that our panelists were able to conclude this, reminding us that we are a nation in which there are nations of nations here, that we are all connected to each other, and the global fight against imperialism is one that we are all fighting. And it reminds me of a book that I love by a Lebanese comrade who was Christian during the Civil War and fought with the Palestinian resistance. And he wrote in his book, "This isn't a Palestinian flag. Palestine isn't a country for it to have a flag. Palestine is a condition. Every Arab is a Palestinian. Every poor man who carried a gun is a Palestinian. Palestine is the condition of us all." And this is something that I think calls to remind us that we all share in a condition, whether we are Palestinians or Lakota or members of any colonized people that are fighting against imperialism, that we are sharing that condition together and we are sharing that joint fight together. Thank you all so much.
Hello. Hi. So sorry, just one last thing. My friend Maram was a medical student in Gaza before the latest siege. Right now, I'm helping her raise money for her family. The Rafah closing is destroyed thanks to the occupier, but they're using the funds they raise to survive until we here in the United States can end this war that we are funding. So if you want to give a little bit of change to Maram and her family, she could really appreciate it. She DMs me every day asking why the donations have slowed, so please find me. Thank you.